Kale shivered as the icy wind cut through the narrow valley. The snow crunched under his boots as he walked back to his small cabin. The sun had long gone behind the mountains, leaving the sky dark and the air colder than usual. Kale had spent the day exploring the frozen caves of Vedra, noting strange markings and tiny footprints he didn't fully understand. His body was tired, but his mind kept buzzing with curiosity. The planet was harsh and life here was fragile. Humans had only been on Vedra for a short time, studying its strange creatures, but the planet still held many secrets. Kale pushed open the cabin door and a small wave of warm air greeted him. He shook off the snow and closed the door behind him. The cabin was simple, just a bed, a heater and a few shelves with supplies, but it was his safe place in the cold world outside. He kicked off his boots and rubbed his hands together, feeling the blood return to his fingers. The day had been long, and all he wanted now was to lie under his warm blanket and rest. He climbed into bed, pulling the blanket over himself. At first he felt the usual comfort of warmth, but then he noticed something strange. Something soft moved beneath the blanket, tiny and trembling. He froze for a moment, unsure of what it could be. He slowly reached down, and his fingers brushed against soft, scaly skin. Kale's eyes widened as he realized what he had found. 3 tiny creatures no bigger than his forearm were huddled together under his blanket. Their eyes were wide and glistening, their bodies shaking. They had small, shimmering scales that caught the faint light from the heater, and tiny wings that looked too fragile to fly. They looked up at him, and in a way their small, high-pitched cries sounded almost like words. "Please, don't hurt us," they seemed to say. Kale's heart skipped a beat. He had read about dragons on Vedra, majestic, powerful creatures, but he had never imagined he would find baby dragons like this, lost and alone in the snow. Their mother was nowhere in sight, and Kale knew that without warmth, they could not survive the night. He felt a mix of awe and responsibility. Slowly he scooped them up one by one, careful not to scare them. The tiny creatures curled against him, seeking warmth. Their small claws were soft, their little tails wrapped around his arm, and their wings fluttered gently. Kale smiled, feeling a strange sense of joy and wonder. He had handled many alien creatures before, but none had made him feel this close to life itself. He wrapped them gently in the blanket, making sure they were secure. They snuggled together, their trembling slowing as they felt the warmth of his body. Kale could feel their tiny hearts beating fast, and he whispered softly to them, even though he knew they might not understand. "It's okay," he said. "You're safe now." The cabin was quiet except for the faint sound of their tiny breaths. Outside, the wind howled and snow continued to fall, but inside there was warmth and life. Kale looked down at them and thought about how fragile and small they were. Yet even in their weakness they had a spark of life and courage that amazed him. It was as if they had already decided to trust him, even though they had just met. Kale sat back on the bed, holding the blanket close, feeling the weight of responsibility. He knew he could not leave them outside in the cold, and he also knew they could not survive on their own. He would have to help them, feed them, and protect them. It would not be easy. Dragons were powerful when grown, but as babies, they were completely dependent on someone who cared for them. Kale realized that he was now that someone. He thought about the dangers of the planet, the predators, the freezing nights, and the humans who sometimes did not treat creatures kindly. But Kale also knew something important. Humans had something special. They could care, they could understand, and they could choose to do what was right. And tonight he would do what was right. He would keep these tiny dragons safe. As he looked down at their small, glowing eyes, Kale felt a smile spread across his face. The world outside was cold and harsh, but inside this small cabin, there was warmth, hope, and a bond that had begun in the most unexpected way. The baby dragons had come to him for safety, and he had accepted the responsibility without a second thought. Kale wrapped the blanket tighter around them, feeling their small bodies relax. For the first time in days he felt a sense of peace. Outside, the snow fell silently, and the valley lay quiet under the stars. But inside, the tiny dragons slept, safe and warm, while Kale kept watch over them, knowing that this night had changed everything, not just for the dragons but for him as well. And in the quiet of that cold night, Kale knew one thing clearly: he would do whatever it took to keep them alive. The adventure of saving these fragile lives had just begun, and he could already feel that it would change him forever. The next morning, Kale woke to the soft chirps of the baby dragons. They had curled up together under the blanket overnight, and now their tiny eyes blinked at him as if they had something important to say. Kale rubbed his eyes and smiled, amazed at how alert and alive they seemed despite the harsh night. He had expected them to be weak and sick, but they were stronger than he thought. Their small wings twitched, and their tails flicked back and forth as they explored the blanket. Kale sat up carefully, making sure not to startle them. One of the dragons, the smallest, crawled onto his chest, its tiny claws tickling his shirt. He laughed softly, and the other two quickly followed, forming a little pile of warmth and scales. He could feel their small bodies pressing against him, their breath warm and fast. It was a strange feeling, having such tiny, powerful creatures depend on him completely. He thought about their mother. Kale knew she must be hurt or lost, or perhaps worse. That's why the babies had come to him. They had no other choice. He felt a heavy responsibility settle in his chest. He had studied many alien species before, but none had relied on him so entirely. It was both scary and exciting. He knew he had to protect them, feed them, and teach them how to survive. Kale spent the morning cleaning the cabin and setting up a small area for the dragons. He gathered soft cloths and made a little nest near the heater so they could stay warm without constantly needing to climb onto him. The dragons were curious, poking their heads over the edge and trying to climb out. Kale laughed at their clumsiness. Their tiny wings flapped, trying to balance, and their claws scratched lightly on the floor, making soft tapping sounds. Even in such a simple way, they seemed full of life. After arranging their nest, Kale went to prepare food. He had some nutrient packs and small pieces of alien meat from his supplies. He cut them into tiny bites and placed them near the nest. The dragons sniffed the food cautiously at first, then began nibbling, their small jaws working quickly. Kale watched them, fascinated. He had read that dragons were intelligent, but seeing it up close was different. They looked at him with bright, curious eyes, and he felt that they were learning about him just as he was learning about them. As the day went on, Kale began to notice small behaviors. One dragon liked to curl up on his shoulder, another liked to nibble gently at the edge of his sleeve, and the smallest liked to crawl into his hands and fall asleep. He realized that each of them had its own personality, even at this young age. They were playful, cautious, and strangely brave. Despite their small size, they had a spark that made Kale feel proud to be near them. By evening, Kale decided to take them outside for a short while. He wrapped the dragons carefully in a warm cloth and stepped into the snowy valley. The wind blew sharply, but the dragons did not cry out. Instead, they clung to him, their tiny claws holding tight. Kale walked slowly, letting them feel the cold and the snow without risking their safety. He thought about how fragile they were, yet they seemed eager to explore, to understand the world around them. During this walk, Kale realized something important. These dragons were not just helpless babies, they had instincts and courage. They had come to him for help, yes, but they were also curious, brave, and quick to learn. That combination of trust and courage made him feel a deep connection to them. He had seen humans survive against impossible odds, but here he felt that even humans could learn from the dragons. Back in the cabin, Kale set the dragons down near their nest and watched as they explored again. They climbed over the soft cloths, curled up together, and chirped softly to one another. Kale knew they would need more than warmth, they would need training and care. But he also knew that he had started something important. By helping them, he was showing them the kindness and patience that humans could offer, and he felt proud of that. That night, Kale lay down in his bed with the blanket folded near the heater. The dragons, now sleepy from the day's adventures, snuggled into their nest. Kale watched them for a long time, thinking about the days ahead. He knew challenges would come, other creatures, harsh weather, maybe even humans who didn't care about life like he did. But for now, the cabin was safe, warm, and filled with the soft sounds of tiny dragons breathing. Kale smiled, realizing that this was only the beginning. He had come to Vedra as an explorer, studying and mapping, but now he had something far more meaningful. A bond with creatures from another world who trusted him completely. In their small, trembling bodies he saw courage, curiosity, and hope. And in himself he felt the responsibility and the pride of being the one who could protect them. Outside, the wind continued to howl, and the snow fell quietly over the valley. But inside the cabin there was warmth, life, and the beginning of a story that would change Kale, the dragons, and maybe even the world around them forever. He leaned back, letting the quiet night settle, and whispered softly to the sleeping babies, "You're safe now. I won't let anything happen to you." For the first time since arriving on this icy planet, Kale felt a calm determination. The dragons had chosen him, and he would rise to the challenge. Together they would face whatever came next. The next few days passed quietly in Kale's cabin. The baby dragons were growing stronger and more active. Their scales shimmered more brightly, and their tiny wings twitched with excitement as they explored the cabin. Kale spent his time watching them closely, learning how they moved, how they ate, and how they reacted to sounds and light. He had grown used to their little chirps and soft squeaks, and sometimes he even tried to mimic them. The dragons would tilt their heads, blink their bright eyes, and sometimes respond with a tiny trill as if understanding him. Kale knew the valley was not safe. Vedra was beautiful, but it was harsh, and danger lurked in every corner. Snow leopards and other predators roamed the ice fields, looking for anything smaller than themselves. And humans from nearby research camps sometimes did not care about the creatures. They took rare animals for study or profit. Kale had to be careful. He could not let anything happen to the baby dragons. They depended on him completely. One evening, as Kale was feeding them small bites of alien meat and nutrients, he heard a sound outside the cabin. At first he thought it was the wind, but then he realized it was footsteps, soft but steady. Someone was coming toward the cabin. Kale froze, his mind racing. He knew it could only be one thing: poachers. Humans who hunted rare creatures. He had heard stories of them taking dragons to sell their scales for high prices. Kale looked at the baby dragons, who were chirping softly as if sensing his tension. He quickly wrapped them in the blanket and held them close. They snuggled against him, tiny bodies trembling but trusting him completely. He whispered softly to calm them, "Don't worry, I've got you. Just stay still." He peeked through the small window and saw two figures moving carefully in the snow. They carried bags and tools for capturing animals. Kale's heart pounded. He had to think fast. There was no way he could fight them head-on. They were larger, stronger, and more experienced in hunting. But he had something they did not: knowledge of the valley and a quick mind. Kale quietly moved to the back of the cabin and opened a small trapdoor he had prepared earlier, leading to a hidden path behind the cabin. The path was narrow and covered with snow, but it would give him a chance to escape with the dragons. He carefully slid the blanket-wrapped dragons into a small, sturdy basket he had reinforced. The dragons chirped softly but did not struggle, trusting him completely. Kale carried the basket to the trapdoor and slipped outside, moving as quietly as possible. The poachers were close now, and Kale could hear their voices as they muttered to each other about missing dragon hatchlings. He felt a rush of fear but also determination. He would not let them take these creatures. Not now, not ever. He followed the hidden path, moving carefully over the snow and rocks. The dragons were quiet, their small bodies pressed close to him, and Kale could feel their warmth. He thought about how fragile they were, how quickly they could be lost in the cold. He could not fail them. Every step he took, he imagined their small eyes looking up at him, trusting him completely. After a few minutes, Kale reached a small cave he had discovered earlier while exploring. It was hidden behind a wall of snow and ice, and no one could see it from the valley. He quickly placed the basket inside and arranged some soft cloths for warmth. The dragons slowly peeked out, blinking their eyes and chirping softly as if to say thank you. Kale smiled and patted the basket gently. "You're safe here," he whispered. From the cave, Kale could see the poachers searching the valley. They moved back and forth, looking frustrated, but they did not notice the hidden entrance. Kale realized that his knowledge of the land and his quick thinking had saved the dragons. Even though they were small and helpless, his human creativity and courage had protected them. The night grew colder and the wind howled around the cave. Kale and the dragons huddled together for warmth. He held one of the tiny dragons in his hands, feeling its soft scales and rapid heartbeat. He whispered to it, "We made it through, little one. Nothing can hurt us here." The dragon chirped softly, and Kale felt a deep connection between them. Kale thought about the days ahead. The dragons were growing stronger, but the valley was still full of dangers. He would have to be smart, careful, and brave. He would need to teach the dragons to survive, to understand danger, and to trust him completely. But he also knew something important. Humans had something special. They could care, they could think, and they could protect life in ways no other species could. As he lay down in the cave, the dragons snuggled close to him, sleeping peacefully for the first time since he had found them. Kale looked at the stars through the cave entrance and felt a sense of pride. He had saved them and he would continue to do so. Together they would face whatever challenges came next. Outside, the poachers finally left the valley, defeated and frustrated. Inside the cave, Kale and the dragons rested, safe and warm. It was a small victory, but it was the beginning of a larger journey. Kale knew that the Real adventure was just beginning, and he was ready to face it, not just as an explorer, but as a protector, a friend, and a hero to the tiny dragons who had trusted him completely. The days after the poachers left were quiet but full of new lessons. Kale watched the baby dragons grow stronger each day. Their wings were getting bigger and their little claws became sharper. They were still small, but it was easy to see that soon they would be powerful creatures. Kale smiled every time he saw them stretch their wings or flap excitedly. He had never seen anything like it before. The dragons were curious, playful, and brave in their own way. Kale decided it was time to teach them more than just safety. He wanted them to learn trust, play, and even a little bit of control. He began with simple things like showing them how to balance on small rocks or climb soft slopes in the snow. At first, the dragons wobbled and tumbled, chirping loudly, but Kale never laughed at them. Instead, he encouraged them gently, patting their backs and speaking softly. "You can do it," he said. "Try again. I'm here." The dragons responded quickly to his kindness. The smallest one, who he called Spark, seemed especially smart. Spark would try, fail, and then try again without giving up. Another, he named Blaze, was more cautious but would watch Kale carefully and copy what he did. The third, Ember, liked to explore but always came back to Kale when something scared him. Kale felt proud of them. Even though they were tiny, their personalities were strong, and their trust in him was growing every day. Kale also spent time teaching them about the dangers of Vedra. He pointed to shadows moving across the snow and explained softly what they might be. He tapped on rough surfaces to show them places to hide. He used small stones to demonstrate how to avoid slipping. The dragons watched carefully, their eyes bright and focused. It was amazing to Kale how fast they learned. He realized that humans were not the only clever species, but the combination of his guidance and their intelligence made them stronger together. Every night, the dragons slept close to him, huddled under the blanket. Kale felt their warmth and heartbeat against his chest. Sometimes he would whisper stories to them about the stars, the mountains, and other creatures of Vedra. They seemed to listen, blinking slowly and occasionally letting out a soft trill. Kale wondered if they understood him in their own way. Maybe not every word, but the care behind his voice. That thought made him smile. One afternoon, Kale decided to take the dragons on a small walk outside the cave. He wrapped them carefully in the blanket and stepped into the snowy valley. The sun was low, casting long shadows over the ice. The dragons were curious and excited, stretching their wings and chirping as they felt the wind. Kale walked slowly, letting them experience the snow without danger. He was careful, always scanning the area for predators. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the valley. Kale froze. A large ice sheet had broken off a nearby cliff and tumbled down, shaking the snow. The dragons chirped nervously, their small wings flapping as they tried to hide. Kale stayed calm. He picked up the basket quickly and held the dragons close. He moved them behind a large rock where they were safe from falling ice. The dragons pressed against him, trusting him completely. Kale whispered softly, "It's okay. I've got you." After the danger passed, Kale set the dragons down gently. They chirped softly and explored again, but now they stayed closer to him. Kale realized that through small adventures and careful protection, their trust was becoming stronger every day. The dragons were learning that the world could be dangerous, but with him they could feel safe. He felt a deep pride in that bond. Kale also began noticing small things about the dragons that made him laugh. Spark liked to crawl into his sleeves and nap, sometimes making him walk like a careful robot. Blaze loved to watch him eat, chirping as if asking for tiny bites. Ember liked to chase small shadows on the floor, hopping clumsily but never hurting himself. Kale enjoyed their quirks and started to feel that the dragons were not just his responsibility, they were his companions and friends. At night, he lay on the soft blanket with the dragons snuggled close. He watched the stars through the cave opening and thought about how much he had learned from these tiny creatures. Even in their smallness, they had courage, curiosity, and intelligence. They reminded him that life was precious, and that even a human could make a difference by caring, protecting, and teaching. Kale realized that this bond was changing him as much as it was changing them. He felt a new kind of strength, a combination of patience, care, and courage that he had never needed before. He knew the dragons would grow up strong, and that someday they might fly across the valley and face the world on their own. But for now, he would continue to guide them, protect them, and enjoy every moment of their playful, curious little lives. And as he drifted to sleep with their tiny bodies pressed close, Kale knew one thing for certain. The dragons had chosen him, and in return he had chosen to protect them with everything he had. The bond they shared was more than survival, it was trust, friendship, and a quiet kind of heroism that only humans could show. Winter was fading from the valley, but the cold still lingered. Kale watched the baby dragons from the entrance of the cave, their tiny wings flapping as they tested the wind. They had grown noticeably stronger, and even though they were still small, there was a spark of confidence in their eyes. Kale felt proud. He had nurtured them, protected them, and taught them how to survive. Now it was time to see if they were ready for the world outside the cabin. That morning, Kale packed a small bag of food and water, just in case the dragons got hungry during their walk. He wrapped them gently in the blanket and carried them toward the edge of the valley. The snow sparkled in the sunlight, and the ice reflected the blue of the sky. The dragons chirped softly, feeling the wind against their scales. Kale smiled at them. They had learned so much, yet he could still see the curiosity and playfulness that made them unique. As they reached a small clearing, Kale set the basket down. The dragons climbed out carefully, one by one, testing the ground beneath their claws. They looked around, their eyes scanning the valley. Kale stayed close, watching for predators. Vedra was still dangerous, and he knew other creatures could be nearby. But he also knew that these dragons were no longer helpless babies. They were learning, growing, and ready to face challenges with him by their side. Suddenly, a shadow moved across the snow. Kale froze. A large predator, a snow claw, was approaching. Its eyes glinted as it spotted the dragons. The dragons hissed and tried to hide behind Kale, their small bodies shaking. Kale took a deep breath and stepped forward. He held his arms out and made himself look bigger, using every bit of human courage he had. The predator hesitated, confused by his boldness. Kale remembered what he had learned from the dragons. They responded to calmness, to guidance, and to trust. He spoke softly, not moving too fast. "Stay close to me," he whispered. The dragons pressed against him, and he felt their tiny hearts beating fast. Then he did something unexpected. He clapped his hands sharply and stomped his foot. The predator flinched, unsure of what to do. Kale's human instincts, his courage, and his quick thinking had given him the advantage. The predator snarled but slowly backed away, disappearing into the valley. The dragons chirped excitedly. They had seen Kale protect them, and in that moment they understood something important. He was not just their protector, he was their guide and leader. Kale knelt down and let them climb onto his arms. They chirped softly, rubbing their small heads against him. He laughed quietly. "You're safe," he said. "And you're learning fast. You can be brave just like me." For the rest of the day, Kale and the dragons explored the valley carefully. He showed them safe paths, places to hide, and spots where the sun was warmest. The dragons responded quickly, following his instructions and learning to move with confidence. Kale realized that humans had something unique, the ability to teach, to guide, and to protect. His patience, kindness, and courage had shaped the dragons in a way that no instinct alone could. As evening came, Kale decided it was time to return to the cave. The dragons were tired but happy, their wings twitching and tails flicking with excitement. Back at the cave, Kale fed them and let them rest under the blanket. He watched them sleep, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. He had saved them from danger, taught them to survive, and created a bond that could never be broken. That night, Kale thought about the future. The dragons would grow, fly, and face challenges on their own, but they would always remember him. He had shown them kindness, courage, and trust. He had shown them that humans were not just weak or fragile, but capable of great things. In a strange way, the dragons had also taught him something: patience, joy, and the quiet power of caring for others. Weeks passed, and the dragons became stronger every day. Kale continued to guide them, teaching them to hunt small creatures safely and fly short distances. He realized that humans had a unique gift: the ability to form bonds across species, to care deeply, and to act with courage when it mattered most. The dragons had been helpless when he found them, but now they were learning to survive and thrive. Finally, one clear morning, Kale carried the dragons to the top of a small hill overlooking the valley. He unwrapped them from the blanket and watched as they spread their wings. One by one they tested the wind, then flapped harder, lifting slightly off the ground. Kale felt a surge of pride. They were ready. The dragons circled around him once, chirping happily before gliding off toward the mountains. Kale watched them go, feeling a mix of joy and sadness. He had nurtured them, protected them, and guided them. Now they were free, ready to face the world. But the bond they shared would never fade. Kale smiled as he stood on the hill, watching the dragons disappear into the distance. He had saved lives, taught courage, and shown that humans could make a difference. In a world of cold ice and dangerous creatures, a human had brought warmth, hope, and trust to fragile lives. And in doing so he had changed them, and himself, forever. The valley was quiet again, but Kale knew that somewhere above, the dragons were flying strong, carrying the lessons he had taught them. And one day they might return, not just as creatures he had saved, but as friends who remembered the human who had wrapped them gently in a blanket and believed in them. Kale turned back toward his cabin, feeling the weight of responsibility and pride. He had learned that even small acts of kindness could change the world. And on Vedra, a human had shown that courage, empathy, and care could create heroes, not just for humans but for all creatures.